Thanks for watching. It would help me tremendously if you could please subscribe to my channel and like or share this video with your friends. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys how I installed a factory style of surf gate on my 07 Malibu Wakesetter VTX. This is what we started with, just a clean slate. I went out to the dealership and I looked at a lot of newer Malibus, which they had in stock, of their surf gates and measured a lot of different measurements to decide how far the gates should be inward, how far they should deploy outward, where to mount the actuator, where the hinge is mounted, how far the hinge is in from the outside, all those sorts of things. I even had the salesman operate some of the surf gates for me so I could see how they worked and again how far they actuated out and inward too. I took a lot of measurements. These may not be super important for you because later in this video I do show you where my holes were actually drilled into my hull of my Wakesetter. So note these measurements if you like. Again, probably not super important. What this dealership also did for me was allowed me to get a set of used surf gates. They were purple, obviously not the right color for my boat, but it was a starting point for me. And here's the gates. I was able to modify them perfectly as I needed for my boat. So they were the correct material and just a perfect starting point for me. So I made a template the exact size of my surf gates out of cardboard.
This is my first mock-up using the stock size of surf gate here. As you can see, for this hull, it is about 2.5 to 3 inches too long. So we're going to cut some off of here so that it doesn't hang below the boat, because the top half already has a cut in it designed to fit that hull. So we're going to cut off some down here.
And I just used a jigsaw to cut off that 2.5 or 3 inches off the bottom of the plate, and then used a fiberglass resin to seal up and give strength to that cut edge of the surf gate. After a lot of different research on hinges, I looked at this Home Depot one, I looked at welded pin styles. I went with this Ace Hardware one. It came out to be the best stainless steel type of hinge for our situation here. It was a little bit smaller than the Home Depot one, but with the holes that were already in my existing surf gate, it seemed to work the best. Some of my holes I did have to fill with fiberglass resin to strengthen them up and drill a couple of new holes. Due to so much trial and error, I did have a lot of extra holes, as you can see, but you will only have 6 when all said and done. I recommend putting painter's tape on the back of your boat where you'll be working on the rear transom. It is great for drawing on with marker and making measurements, and it won't splinter when drilling through the boat. After measuring and figuring out where I was going to drill, which I will show you in just a couple of slides, I opted to drill the top and bottommost bolt on my hinges first. That way I could see how everything operated and how it swung in case I needed to make any changes. There was less holes to be filled. I did well, no mistakes were made and no holes needed to be filled. After the top and bottom hinge holes were drilled, then I moved on to the actuator mounting. I did the same technique as the hinges. I drilled the hole for the top bolt first on the actuator hull of the boat, and then I took note of where it would sit on the actual surf gate. A tip here is to put the surf gate in the middle of where it's halfway deployed and halfway retracted, and drill your top bolt on the surf gate at that position. Doing so will give you the best of both worlds, because when the surf gate goes out, the plate wants to move one way, and when it comes in, it wants to move the other way. So putting it right in the middle between in and out will give you the best neutral position. And the remaining movement will just be taken up by a little bit of plastic flex, which isn't a ton. This shows you the retracted position of the surf gate, and it's perfectly parallel with the swim platform, as you can see here. You will want your actuator sucked all the way inward for measuring where to drill the holes for this position. You can also see here that the surf gate is inward from the side of the boat, so it's not creating any extra drag when it is retracted. Once you've got the top and bottom holes drilled, you can put bolts through them and continue to drill the rest of the holes all the way through the transom of the boat. Here are some measurements for you if you want to know exactly where my holes are drilled. Feel free to pause the video to examine any of these measurements if you have the identical hull that I do. Once you've got everything fit together and you've done trial runs putting all the bolts through, you're going to put some silicone through the holes and on the plate, and then screw everything down tightly for the final time.
Instead of using the through bolts with nuts on the back side on this inner bolt, I opted to use the self-tapping screw just because these two holes are just so close to each other. And if you use a self-tapper, you can drill this hole a little bit smaller than the 1/4 inch that these are drilled to. So these are 1/4 inch, but these you can, or this one you can drop down to 7/32 for the self-tapper. And this one is larger than a 1/4 inch for the wiring to go through. This is a 5/16 I used, and I even had to waller it out a little bit bigger to get that wire to go through. So that's what I opted to do on that inside one, is use the self-tapper screw so I can drill a smaller hole so there's a little bit more strength in between those two holes there. So I put the wiring towards the inside of the boat on both sides, wiring inside. Also, this label goes to the inside. The kit that sells these brackets right here comes with the seal. So we're going to run the wiring through the bracket and then through the seal. Now when I do this, I think it's good to leave a little bit of the wire bent out in a U shape, somewhat like this, because upon testing the way it flexes, that puts the least strain on the wire, which will, if the wiring does wear out from years of flexing, that's the least it flexes. If you put it any tighter like that, it flexes a lot more and makes a pinch point. So I think it's important to pull a couple inches of wire out to make a U shape towards the inside of the boat, of course. I do have the false floor in the boat pulled up partially as far as I easily could without major pulling of the seats and things like that.
And I did have to notch the false floor just a little bit because where the wire comes through is exactly where that false floor sits. So I just had to notch it a little bit to allow room for that wire to come into the boat.
Right about there, I think looks good. Make sure our seal's seated in place on the back side into its cone-shaped position. Use the Marine adhesive sealant Fast Cure 4200, I did buy white because that was all that was available locally. But if I did it again, I would purchase clear. Because the white kind of stands out a little bit, but not a huge deal. Filling the holes with the sealant. You don't need a lot because obviously the bolt takes up most of that hole. And I put a little bit on the wire in the area where it's going to be going through the bolt as well. This is some pretty sticky sealant. Quite a bit stickier than your average silicone would be. I think it does very well for this type of thing. It's made for marine applications. Inch and 3/4 stainless steel bolts is what I'm putting through these brackets. The rest of the bolts are 1 1/4 inches, I believe. Now on the inside of the boat, I'm going to use stainless steel lock nuts along with stainless steel flat fender washers. So getting up in the boat, this is what it looks like. Put the sealant on the back side here, and then you fasten the washer nut down, and then I just spread the sealant around the wire as well. And my style of rear tie downs are no longer going to work in the position they're in because they're in the way of the gate. So what we do is we simply just loosen up the mounting bolt on the back side of it and tilt it over to about a 45, and we hook right on here. Here's what it looks finished. And what I'm doing is just putting 2 bolts with locking nuts on these 2. This one I'm doing another self-tapper that's not going to go all the way through. These 2 are the only ones that will go all the way through. And I just came up with that from looking at Malibu's stock setup, as well as the orientation on which way to point this. As for the hardware I used, I purchased 4 different styles of stainless steel hinges, some from Home Depot, some online, and a couple different ones from Ace Hardware as well. I ended up going with these screen door hinges. What you need to make sure is that they're a flat style of hinge. They can't have a bump in them. And I guess the best way to word that is they call it a screen door hinge, because if there is a bump in the hinge, it won't flush mount. I guess is another way to put it. As a flush mount hinge is what is needed for this type of setup. So I opted to go with the stainless steel screen door hinges from Ace. They're $10 a piece, 2-pack for $19.99. And then bolts, 1/4 inch by 20 by 1 1/4 inch for these and these, 1 1/4 inch long, with lock nuts on the back of all of them. Stainless steel, of course. And same size but different length, 1 3/4 inch is everywhere that you go through these larger brackets. And also, I purchased the same size of screen door hinge, only in zinc because it was a little bit cheaper. And on the inside of the boat, where there's less apt for rust, I took the hinges that were the same exact size as these, pulled the pin out, cut the pin off of it, and that's what I used for washers on the back side of the boat. Instead of fabricating anything, that's all we had to do. We'll just buy the pins, everything matched up the holes, cut the pins off of them, and use them on the back side. I was able to tuck them in nice and tight here and still get plenty of full deploy. Probably much more than we'll need to use. Just a couple of fingers under the swim platform, which matches up with these body lines here.
I've got everything assembled now and tests fit. Now take them off and off to the paint shop we go.
So I just got the gates back from the body shop, had them color matched to the boat. So we've got the completed surf gates here. Now we're going to bolt them on with the stainless steel screws and stainless steel locking nuts.
And I'm testing everything out here using the Wakelogic controller, which I'll provide a link in the video for if you want to purchase it and go that route. Testing out the port side wave here. We still need to do some fine tuning with the weight distribution. The wave did end up getting bigger than is even shown here in the video. And as far as spray, not much spray coming off that starboard side of the boat where the gate is deployed. And as always, a very good looking goofy sided wave. As I mentioned before, I opted to use the Wakelogic controller that has a waterproof and wireless fob that the surfer can take with them to do wake transfers from goofy to regular and regular back to goofy or vice versa sided surfing. To me, it's worth the money to install that computer. It's also GPS speed controlled, so the gates will automatically deploy when you've got them activated and armed when you get to the current set speed that you've chosen. And then when you slow down, they will retract as well. Way less operations for the driver to even have to worry about when everything is GPS computerized controlled. So I do recommend the Wakelogic if you are thinking about going that route. Again, if you would please subscribe to my channel, it's greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching and tell your friends about this. Thanks.